you going to put the heavy guy first?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, smart thinking.
Trapping, moose calling, and all that kind of activity.
God, that would have looked so different 2,000 years, or 200 years ago.
This is all.
Yeah.
As much as 1870, like it's the quality of the of the concrete.
Well, this is a perfect site, though.
Yeah, what a beautiful! It would have been a beautiful town.
Yeah. I guess the way I look at it is I look here, and I really am trying to wrap my head around 2,000 people here. Yeah, you know, you got people raising, yeah, like, you know, they're raising their kids here, yeah, all birthdays, and now all we have here is, you know, just a little small
The trail
remembrance, and yet they were so,
venturing out west,
I don't know.
must have been quite a challenge.
Well, yeah, about 1,800 kilometers. Came out from Headingley, Manitoba, the White Horse Plains, and came out. But what was really remarkable was when they came out, you know, they just didn't have light carts and horses and maybe a few cattle. They brought out a fair bit of equipment with them because they were coming out here to be permanently settled. So they brought with them a steam boiler.
I still wouldn't have drug a steam plant. There's no way, 1,200 miles.
Yeah, they were entrepreneur at heart, the free people they called them.
Yeah.
The government led a contract to build a traffic bridge across the river, and the Mackenzies weren't formally trained engineers. But they put in a bid to build the bridge. Their bid was accepted because it was quite.
Okay.
So they built a bridge based on what they thought would be practical and all that. So they created one, and it. Actually, it wasn't. I've seen pictures of it. It wasn't a pretty bridge,
Yeah.
but it was a very serviceable bridge, and they put it in, and it lasted for 5 years. So I mean, it had some durability to it. Eventually, though, the government came along and they brought in the government engineers to build a proper engineered bridge, and that one literally went out in the next spring with the floods. So the people that used what they felt was common sense to build a bridge, that one lasted. The one that was all done according to the code books and everything, it didn't last.
Well, I do workshops across the country, well, Saskatchewan, BC, and Alberta. But I was doing a workshop here not too long ago in a small town community, and a fellow asked me about the Metis, and he asked what we basically had contributed, and I found that funny because as he said, you didn't have a government. I said, well, actually, we did have our own government. We formed our own government, and we had our own elected delegates. I said we had a trade route. We were a functioning society. And he goes, well, I've never heard of this trade route. And I said, have you heard of Highway 16? You know, it goes by Edmonton, the Yellowhead Trail.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I've heard of that. I said, well, that's where we came from. That was our trade route. That was one of them. And as you were saying today, you know, from Edmonton down to the Cypress Hills, there's another trade route. Follow the river sources, you got us.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just more, I guess, educating people on the history of us, that we're not forgotten. We're out there, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, they did very well. They built up very much into the community. I mean, first of all, there was the old Calgary-Edmonton Trail, and they created an alternate one where the trail was supposed to be a little bit easier to use, but then it didn't have the same crossing site across the river that they did at Fort Normandeau. So then they brought in their own ferry, or built their own ferry, so that people could cross the river. They started their own little school for the kids. When they did a little bit of archaeology work around the cairn, they found out the cairn is pretty much right on in terms of where the store was.
Wow.
The fort itself actually wasn't there, it was farther up.
This resistance, whichever term you want to use, happened. The Canadian Army came in and took it over and built a palisade around it and called it a fort, and named it after Bedard Normando, the lieutenant, for the small collection of men that they left here. And there was never any fighting here. The militia didn't stay here very long, and then afterwards the fort was taken over by the Northwest Mounted Police, who then used it as a police post, which made sense because you're on the main trail. Most of the traffic and people you'd be watching for, they would go by one way or other.
But the stories of the resistance, there was a lot of the stories that have come out from the diaries of soldiers that I came across, where they were appalled at the age of the people that did the standoff in Batoche. And coming through here would have most likely been the Gatling gun and
Yes.
yeah, so the latest of weaponry, like Winnipeg strike wasn't 1920s, early 20s, and the sergeant or the person in charge of the policing at that time had a conversation with Louis Riel in jail,
Oh, really?
for instance, and one of the media person as well, so documented. So they were still
They're still around.
party to the structure of
You think about 2,000 people that they actually saw the need to leave a detachment here.
yeah.
And that's what I find. I mean, it's nice with the cemetery and everything else, but it'd be nice to see a cairn marking. I mean, that's historic, right?
Yeah.
That builds the entire,
That's,
I
appreciate the mention of the policing force also present, so it was a viable community, certainly flourishing for a very short term until being labeled squatters.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they ended up coming here facing the same issues that
Yeah.
they had faced back home.
which is really one of the great ironies
Yeah.
of it is that there have been, while they were here, the Northwest Rebellion or the Northwest Resistance had broken out. Many of the issues of people back in the Red River country, southern Manitoba, fighting over, or not just there, up around in northern Saskatchewan, fighting about a lot of these issues. And they get here, they're following the rule book,
Yeah.
and then they say, yeah, but
Like-
there's these investors, and we kind of promised them, but we'll give you a decision in a few years.
It's almost uncanny how the Red River settlement of that era and their struggles with the Pemmican Wars, for instance, and all that kind of stuff, then leapfrogging to central Alberta to try and find peace in a way of life and being obstructed by the same tactics.
And there was a whole bunch of applications for Métis for script, and I think they only gave out 3. That was it. Like the rest, and of course, you're not going to give land, and the way the whole government structure was set up, you're not going to give land to half-breeds, right?
Inhabitants,
To the inhabitants. It was the way it was, that mine structure back then. So, yeah, I always found that interesting.
Under the rules of the time, if you came before there were surveys, you had squatters' rights, because you were here first, and the law said you were supposed to recognize it, but the government really dithered about how they would recognize that. So Mackenzie's started a petition in 1887 and asked that their rights, which were legitimate ones, be recognized. Almost everybody in the area agreed with it, but the government dithered. They sent the petition in 1887. The actual response didn't come till 1893, and when it did finally come, they said, well, too much time has passed, we can't do anything now, which...
Great-great-grandma is buried in the 67th Street Cemetery, but they built a walkway right across her grave. So she's in the middle of that. And my cousin had been looking for her last resting place, and that was where he had finally tracked her down. And the gentleman that managed the cemetery, he gave him the coordinates, and so they were looking for them. And yeah, that's where she is.
Giving a ride to the Danes, a woman that was with the Danes family way back, and he was pointing out the scaffolds were visible.
And so we need to get a marker and figure out how we can mark it when it's a place where people will be walking continuously. So.
This is Metis aerobics running downhill instead of uphill. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not sure where it was posted on a sign, so I don't see whether they're isolating it from public, which I don't see.
So when we came here from Caroline, my folks brought me, well, because we'd get a better education in Red Deer, but also to get away from the racism and the fighting that was in Caroline. And I just found that I had more people to fight with at school. If it wasn't for Morris Llewellyn, I'd probably gone to jail, because we were talking about, because I'd been in a fight, and he said, you know, if you want to prove these people right, keep doing what you're doing. If you want to prove them wrong, then you need to change, because they're not going to.
Yeah. There, right? So coming to Red Deer, I had this idea in my mind growing up that I wasn't good enough to marry a white woman or have a white girlfriend, and that's how I grew up, you know, in my own life. Right? Yeah. And so I come to Alberta, and I sensed there was something different in the city of Red Deer, that it was okay. You know, I could go out. Yeah, I could go out with white girls if they so choose.
If they caught you on a week, moment.
Yeah, a week moment. That's right. So yeah, that was yeah, and I only experienced a couple incidences in the city of Red Deer where there was racism. You know,
growing up in Red Deer as a Métis person, there was not a lot of connection in Red Deer at that time with the Métis, just our families. And growing up in Red Deer, I think I remember the most about growing up in Red Deer was shame. Shame connected with being Aboriginal or Métis or Indigenous, First Nations. All of those terms, I remember being very ashamed. And it's hard to explain, because how, you know, why are you ashamed? Why am I ashamed? I haven't done anything. Usually when you do something wrong, you feel shame. But I felt this tremendous amount of being shameful of having blood, Indigenous blood, and I have no real reason why. You know, I don't think, I think maybe my mom and dad had some influence on that as well. I think they carried that from their experience as children. I'm told that they did some, or were in school, residential schools or day schools. So that may have been a kind of intergenerational trauma from those days as well. I'm not sure why, but I can very definitely remember that growing up in Red Deer. And it wasn't until I was into my mid-20s that I started to change my view and become a little bit more proud.
I think it's special that we still are out in the community doing what you guys had started and continuing to show the pride in our culture through arts with the music and the dance. With Metis jigging, I'm just always happy whenever we have a request from somewhere in the community to go and showcase our Metis jigging, and I love being able to teach it after our performances to see who in the crowd wants to come up and take a shot at learning the traditional jig as well as some fancy steps, and that always seems to be our favorite part. Recently, I think in the last couple of years, Central Middle School had asked me to go down and be a part of showing them, talking to them a bit about the Métis culture and doing the Métis jig and showing them how it all works. And I thought it was quite special because when I was talking about the Métis jigging and what we used to learn about Louis Riel, the teacher actually interrupted me to explain to the students what we used to learn about Louis Riel. And that just made my heart smile, that there's just learning something very different than what we had, and to be able to go back to a school that I had gone to that they wanted to showcase, and that the Métis flag is up there now in the auditorium where we used to eat our lunches, and I thought that was very special.
Hello, okay. Welcome, certainly to the hub downtown. It's a privilege to have been provided this venue and celebrating Alberta. Certainly the province of Alberta is celebrating cultural days. So thankfully the cultures are surfacing in a grand scale in Alberta today's day and age. And so what you're going to come to see certainly is the Métis dance and music. That's certainly older than Canada in itself, and it evolves from the fur trade. So we are blessed with the people that are keeping the culture alive, and that's what you're going to get a glimpse of. And I like to say we learned to step dancing simply from trying to keep our feet warm in the cold winters. So without further ado, Rob and I, in 91, 92, we started a dance troupe and never looked back. Unfortunately, their mom scheduled us to the 9, though we like to call it Métis aerobics as well. And Daniel and Laura Allard, they were just that size when we first started, and such as Brianna was back in not that long ago. And Colton Bear has joined Brianna to back her up on guitar. Thank you so much. So here we go. We're going to start with. I'll hand it off to Daniel, which will simply explain the next process.
All right, so the Red River Jig is what we're going to show you first. And so if you can imagine on the fur trade back in the day, you'd have these cultures working hard during the day with each other, and then in the evening, just like we do today, you're going to probably hang out and socialize and party. So these dances and the two different cultures, they started to meld, and then you ended up with the step dancing. It's got some European influence, and then you'll see some First Nations influence when the music drops in tone. And you'll see it's a little bit less rigid than your normal Celtic dancing. So literally just imagine after a hard day's work, people just wanted to party and dance. So let me show you.
I'm definitely trying to learn more of the very old type of Métis tunes. Back when I was up north like a year ago or so, I heard the term bush fiddle, and that was like the Métis, really old Métis style of like traditional music. And a lot of people say I should maybe bring that back and bring back that bush fiddle. So I'm trying to venture into like really old tapes of like fiddle players back in the day, and just trying to figure out how to get that sound and to bring it back, because we don't want to really lose that, because it's a different type of genre of fiddling.
When I grew up, the Red River Jig was something that was danced after a few beers in the backyard. It was almost something to be ashamed of. And I know you know what I'm talking about. And it wasn't something to really connect with. And I saw the cycle of the addiction stuff and family violence and all kinds of stuff, connected to that culture as well. And when I started to jig, and I started to learn sort of the cultural connection with the jig, it literally changed my life.
It's important for people to realize that there's this dance culture within the Métis culture, and it just helps spread that word and make sure that the culture is maintained in any way we can. That's how we cleaned up the party after everyone celebrated a good fur trading day.
So it's been a real learning curve for me in educating people. But as I was telling you guys earlier, with the school division in that area, that Prairie Land, they've really embraced educating the students on the Indigenous part of it, and First Nations and the Métis. And I found that from a traditional point of view, they're really thinking outside of the box, and their school board's been very supportive of it, and it's met some backlash. But at the end of the day, the kids have a better understanding of the whole thing, and how Canada basically evolved to where it is now, and that gives me hope going forward.
I think I was fortunate to number one go on to university. In my family, my cousins, my sisters and brothers, I was the very first one to go on to post-secondary, and that was very unusual in our family. My dad used to say, or my mom and dad used to say, everything's okay as long as there's no police knocking at our door. So if you're in trouble if that happens. And so education was almost secondary. They didn't spend a lot of time in my schools as I was going through education system here in Red Deer. And so it wasn't really something that was pushed. And so for me to go into university and become a teacher was a kind of a big, I think, something my mom and dad were very proud of. And so getting involved in education gave me an opportunity to kind of see how things have evolved since I first started teaching, and there's been a huge change. Initially we were teaching that basically everything started when Canada started, and then all of a sudden we started learning about these other people that were there, but nobody knew for how long or why they were there or who they were. And so it's come a long ways. Now the First Nations, Métis and Inuit perspective has been infused into the curriculum in every grade level and every subject, and that's something that we never have seen in the past. So that's a huge improvement. Still a long ways to go. We have certain areas that we still need to address, more in the area of treaties in particular, I'm thinking. And also we're looking at, I had opportunity about 10 years ago to become involved in a program called, at that time it was called the Aboriginal Frontline Program. And then it became the FNMI Learning Services. And my job as a teacher in that program was to support teachers, develop curriculum with an FNMI perspective, and also to give some cultural knowledge to the Indigenous students in Red Deer Public, and also at the time Red Deer Catholic.
I have this irresistible urge. I want to put that back up on top.